We already had an image for the front cover of part 21, but an image is worth 1,000 words, and we thought that this image correctly and succinctly described Patton West's world service. We hope you like it. Welcome to part 21 of Rishi the Movie. There's an enormous amount of material available to prove that Patton West is a career criminal, a terrorist, a murderer, and has been racketeering for 35 years in 3 Western states, New Mexico, Montana, and recently Arizona. Now, Patton West is not a guru. She has nothing going for her other than the occult weapon she acquired while attending the Robert Jaffe School for Energy Mastery in 1990 and 1991, that she uses to terrorize her victims into handing over their wealth and their energy and their life force. Now, when I launched my lawsuit against Patton West in 2003 and got my result in 2008, I'd have had a hard time convincing people that Patton West was using a terrorist weapon to basically feather her nest at the expense of everyone she meets. That's the whole point of the cult. And get the livestock in and harvest them and move on. And that's what she's been doing for 35 years. Now, there are a lot of victims and witnesses who will attest to being targeted by Patton West using her occult, shamanic visioning, terrorist weapon. But I would ask the viewer to look at this short piece of video which I captured recently from a congressional hearing about the Havana syndrome. Now, you can go look at the whole thing. The important point I want to share with you are the comments right at the end of this clip.
If your assessments here are correct, these are very covert weapons, aren't they? They don't leave behind bomb fragments, bullet holes, etc. They could absolutely be used by our adversaries and have very low levels of, very easy to deny that they were even there, that they were used. Is that correct?
That's correct. There's no entry or exit wound. How they're designed is to make the target feel like they're crazy, like they're imagining things, especially on the low duration, the low intensity, long duration hit.
So what you've just heard is a description of a weapon that is, for all intents and purposes, basically identical to what Congress were describing. My point being that Congress have known about the Havana syndrome for decades and have done nothing about it, basically, except to catalogue it. Basically, for 3.5 decades, Patton West has gotten away with using a weapon which is hard to identify. It's hard to identify because, as they hinted at in the congressional hearing, the weapon is not a club, it's not a gun, it's not poison, it doesn't leave a trace. So it is very hard to link Patton West to her victims. However, now they're between 40 to 100 victims, all saying the same. That's changed. All we need to do now is to get the authorities involved directly and to interview all the victims and witnesses, chief amongst them being myself. Now, much of the evidence we have produced is now online and in the 21 parts of Rishi the Movie. All of this information is now online, and I would urge the FBI, the police, the state governments, federal governments, IRS, et al., to go do something with the information that is sitting there. Once you delve into this information, you quickly understand that Patton West is either a career criminal or criminally insane, probably both, and that she doesn't have an ounce of spirituality in her little finger. She's just a grifter, a glorified grifter with a different kind of weapon to bring about exactly the same result that the mafia has or any criminal gang has over their constituency, which is fear is the main weapon. And that's what she's been doing for 35 years. There is nothing else there. Now, the great thing about facts is they may be ignored, but they never go away. This is what Patton West means by conscious fiscal mastery. Now, the same weapon she uses to intimidate people into emptying their bank accounts into hers is used to intimidate them into remaining silent about the crimes committed against them and intimidate them into not going to the courts for restitution or the police for justice. And for 95% of the victims over the past 35 years, that has worked well for her. And if things go wrong, as we've discovered, she's got the 4 senior members of her cult to basically threaten, intimidate, or just fund her so that she can outspend her victims in court, just as Williams did by pledging $2 million in January 2007 to fund Patton West's legal fees against my lawsuits and doubtless scores of other victims' lawsuits. There were, at one point, I think 8 websites up. 2 have been taken down. I have copies of most of the material, but I suspect the authors of those websites, like myself, were the subject of terrorist attacks, which resulted in them taking down their websites and going quiet. So I'm just going to throw up some more material that I've found on other websites and elsewhere to add to basically what is available to the FBI, the police, state governments, so that they have the maximum number of witnesses and victims to interview so as to basically understand what has been going on in the last 35 years. In my opinion, Patton West is without a doubt the most prolific terrorist in American history. If one looks at the definition of terrorism, which is using force to intimidate or coerce somebody into doing something that they wouldn't normally do. Now, I reckon there are at least 40 to 60 to 70 people, maybe many, many more, that can be interviewed and who will confirm what I am saying, what Guru Mag is saying through B. Schofield's interview, and what many of the victims I have featured in this movie have been saying. All we've got to do now is get the authorities to actually do something about it. That is, arresting each of them, questioning them, comparing their answers against reality and the victims, and then having them attend a RICO trial for racketeering for 35 years, for countless acts of terrorism. The murders are a little tricky, but I'm going to be there as a witness for the 2 attempts on my life, and to add some circumstantial evidence that both Joseph Costantino and Lisa Swidler were murdered by Patton West to keep them quiet. So let's get on with part 21. So if you've come this far, you'll know by now that Patton West is not a guru. It's a disguise she wears. the king-size bed sheets, the white, the blue curtain material draped over her shoulders. She's basically acquiring the culture of India and presenting herself as one of the archetypes in that country, which is the enlightened guru. It's all a disguise for her. Anybody looking at what she actually does, opposed to what she actually says, you'll see that the delusional, fictional character that she presents herself as online and on her websites and her Facebook pages is just that, an illusion. Basically, what you'll find behind that is a career criminal, somebody who's been racketeering for 35 years in 3 Western states, and somebody who is a terrorist and who has used terrorism against scores or hundreds of victims. And then there is a murderer, a serial killer. Well, I'm convinced she's a murderer. I have experience of that. And 2 of my friends suddenly died after opposing her. And all the time, throughout the last 35 years, with the chaos that she creates around herself, the one constant that has appeared over the last 35 years is it doesn't matter what is actually true if she can persuade everybody that her lies are everybody's truth.
It doesn't matter what is actually true.
And secondly, I am not a crook. The truthers are the crooks. Of course, these lies get a little thin and pointless when courts are finding her guilty of committing crimes and she's posting on our website the day after, no, that didn't happen, they got it all wrong, it was dismissed, blah, 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 which is what she did with me and Cole and many, many others. And for some reason, the authorities have looked the other way for 35 years, and she's been allowed to get away with basically 35 years of racketing, thousands of acts of terrorism, and 5 to 7 murders, and 2 failed attempts to take me out. So the content you're about to see is from another website that was posted, and it's still up as far as I know, and that is Cult Facts. Here is their content. Here we have the front page announcing who it's about. Notice there's no Dr. Devra West or any of that bullshit. Patton West is not a doctor of anything, unless, of course, you take seriously the 2 doctorates she awarded herself, which she says the Christ gave her in person. Slide 2, if you ever saw me healed, you'd be down on your knees crying like a frigging baby. Devra West. Does anybody think that enlightened beings would actually make a statement like that? If you ever saw me healed, you'd be down on your frigging knees crying like a baby. This is a statement from an egomaniac, from somebody who was quite possibly insane. Patton West doesn't seem to understand that there are certain behavior traits that go with this label enlightened, like unconditional love, compassion, understanding, forgiveness, all the positive attributes which Patton West never expresses. The woman is insane, psychotic, whatever the labels are around this idiot. She's certainly not enlightened, but the same psychosis, whatever it is, that says if you ever saw me healed, you'd be down on your knees crying like a frigging baby, comes from the same place as the statement she made that Carl Ida Finch overheard, and that is that Devra said she didn't care whether she murdered Dr. Cole because as an enlightened being, she'd be just as comfortable in a 6x6 jail cell as she would in a $6 million mansion. Well, we're going to put that to the test shortly. But again, the point being that an enlightened being wouldn't say that. A career criminal, an insane psychopath would say that. And that is what we've had from this pitiful excuse for a human being for the last 35 years. However, these idiots think she's wonderful. You know, these idiots, I think Williams is a zealot. I think Coffin must be, having been there 30 years. Reynolds is just totally corrupt and would sell his wife and children if the price was right. And of course, Jack West is this limp-wristed man that was soon taken over by Patton West, according to Jeremy Samuelson, who knew them both back in the 70s and 80s, when Patton West was a drug dealer, pot grower and consumer of illegal drugs, which did not make her enlightened, which just turned a very unstable individual who apparently had a very traumatic childhood, just turned them into an egomaniac with visions of grandeur and into someone who's totally delusional about her place in the world. Top of the page, next slide. Devra West has captivated public attention with her unique blend of spirituality. However, beneath the surface of these lofty claims, a darker narrative unfolded, one rife with accusations of manipulation, intimidation, and financial exploitation. At the heart of West's appeal was her promise of spiritual awakening. Part of the problem here is that most people are basically NPCs, sheeple. They cannot think for themselves. They cannot use discernment or logic or think about things in a deep way and arrive at a consensus, either based on data and facts or based on intuition. These are the people I refer to as sheeple, who cannot see Patton West for who she really is, but swallow the lies, the propaganda, the illusion as though it's truth. Last paragraph. Despite the mounting controversies, West maintains a loyal following. Her supporters view her as a misunderstood visionary, unfairly targeted due to her unconventional approach to spirituality. They argue that her methods, though unorthodox, were effective in bringing about profound personal transformations. Yep, I'd have to agree that racketeering, decades of it, thousands of acts of terrorism and multiple murders are an unconventional approach to spirituality. Yes, very. Being a pathological liar, which Patton West obviously is, proves the point. As does the long list of crimes, which are easy to prove. Most of them are based on legal documents, court documents, and newspaper articles. And yet Patton West has the sheeple mesmerized. They are basically brainwashed and conditioned. So even if you presented this information to them suddenly, they wouldn't believe it. They'd say it was lies. One thing we can agree on is that her actions have been effective in bringing about profound personal transformations. There have been 2 attempts on my life, at least, one in 2007 and one in 2023. I've been subject to 19 years of terrorist attacks by Patton West. Moving away from myself, she's destroyed relationships, ruined marriages, and bankrupted several people, and persuaded many followers to take out mortgages and loans to give that money to her, saying that the more money they gave her, the closer to God they would be. Now, because the sheeple have been brainwashed and conditioned to believe all the bullshit and lies, propaganda that Patton West spews constantly and posts on her website, they cannot see reality as it really is. Now, I'd urge everybody viewing this to go on the internet and look up hypnotists and look at some of those videos. So a hypnotist will be on the stage, he'll call somebody up, and he'll hand them a pair of shoes, like running shoes, sneakers, whatever, and they'll be holding them. Then he will hypnotize them into not seeing the shoes that he's holding. Then he will offer $1,000 to that person if they can find the shoes. And they go looking all over the stage, under the chairs, tables, everywhere, and in the end they give up. The hypnotist brings them back and they're holding the shoes. And that is what Patton West has been doing with all these people. She gets them together and hypes up the vibrations. She has somebody doing the music, certain music at certain times. It's basically ritual magic that she's doing on them. So then, like real livestock, they're unaware that they're being farmed, and they're also unaware that they're eventually going to go to slaughter. Now, slaughter may mean many things under Patton West. Have a look at what happened to Lolita Jordan. It could be that that person actually loses their life because a demon has walked into them and taken over them, and they've basically become a robot for Patton West's amusement. It could be violence, overt violence. I mean, her slapping round the face or punching people. She gets off on that stuff. It gives her a real rush. It's like a wet dream for her to be able to get people down on the floor, crawling, wailing, crying, like she's done with Lolita Jordan. Because I've watched you treat other people, sometimes in a very, very bad way. You dispose of them like Kleenex.
That's right.
You treat them
Absolutely.
terribly.
I've disposed of a lot of people of late. It's true.
And what's left of these people after they've gone through the meat grinder? Well, again, I suggest that you go to the website and review the statements made by ex-employees and ex-students in the document library and the audio library. Most will leave the cult penniless. Some will remain and agree to become house slaves because what else can they do? All their friends were inside the cult. And then when she goes to court, the big lie is she's funding all these people. She's funding the charity, when the opposite is the case. And let's not forget that having brainwashed and conditioned the senior members of her cult, they only become senior members when they are controllable. That is, they've been brainwashed and conditioned, or they've committed crimes on behalf of Patton West under her instructions, and she can then blackmail them with that information. In this way, when I reported her to the Secretary of State in 2003, after I was defrauded and summarily dismissed, constructively dismissed, I reported her to the Secretary of State for Montana, and her charity was struck off and she was forced to move. So what does she do? She says only those students who are prepared to commit 66% of their net worth are allowed to accompany her to Shambhala. Shambhala being Lakeside, Montana, which was about 100 miles north of Victor, Montana. And because people have been brainwashed and conditioned, they go along with it. Cole went along with it. And having moved north to Shambhala, which is Victor Montana. And because Patton West didn't have a property, because she was forced out of the property in Victor, which would become the subject of a sheriff's sale to pay past victims of crime $2 million in court fines and interest. But having arrived in Shambhala, and because Patton West didn't have a property, for a couple of years, she used the property belonging to Robert and Tabby Ivy and presented it as her compound, as her own property. And alongside images of that property on Patton West's website were the bios, history of Williams and Coffin. So because they're brainwashed and conditioned, even though they know that compound doesn't exist, even though Patton West is fraudulently using the Robert and Tabby Ivy's property to ingratiate herself with the public so suckers will come along and sign up for her courses, it doesn't exist. But they go along with it because they don't have any discretion. Which is why every time Patton West went to court or a newspaper article appeared about crimes she committed either in New Mexico, Montana, or in Arizona, the members of the cult, it doesn't register with them. In Coffin's case, it means she keeps funding. We reckon about $2 million over the last 30 years to fund Patton West crimes in the USA, in New Mexico, Montana, and Arizona. Williams, 21 years, we reckon hundreds of thousands of dollars, and he's pledged $2 million. That came about when I sued Patton West, and he wrote me a letter threatening me, never met the guy, never spoken to him, and yet he has the balls or lack of grey cells to put a threat in writing to me, which never disappears. He basically said, don't fuck with me or you'll meet your match. And he's pledging $2 million to fund Patton West's legal fees against her victims, me being one of them. Jeff Reynolds, again, he's not a zealot. He's not bought into the brainwashing and conditioning like Coffin and Williams has. He's just totally corrupt. And as I've said earlier, he'd sell his wife and children if the price was right. So no problem for him to announce to a newspaper reporter in what he thought was an off-the-record conversation that I would be dead in 12 months or in jail for reacting to what Patton West was going to do to me, my wife and children. Well, Jeff, it's 19 years later now. You're 18 years out. There have been 2 attempts on my life, as you predicted, and the terrorism has continued for 19 years, day in, day out, sometimes 24/7. So terrorism, there's no statute of limitations on terrorism. And while Reynolds announced a terrorist campaign against me, my wife and children, Coffin and Williams have both been paying for it and they know it. And then, of course, comes Jack West, who's been there forever, 40 years, and he's just a wimp that does as he's told. Okay, we spent a lot of time on that slide. These Let's move on to the next one. Yet to be documented basically, this shows where
accomplices
Patton
in what
West's
Patton West was
latest
doing.
compound was. When she was operating her criminal racketeering business model in Arizona, having been forced to leave Montana in 2010 and forced to leave New Mexico in 1995. Now, on the left at the bottom, also called Divine Unity Foundation. That is the name of her front company that she uses to money launder the proceeds of crime, be it fraud, theft, extortion, embezzlement, or receiving 150 grand from the government in SBA COVID disaster loans for employees she doesn't have, or extorting 500K out of perfectly healthy people who turn up for her private sessions, only to be told that they have a serious illness and that she can fix it for a large sum of money. And that's what happened in 2002, and she got $500,000 for it. So on the screen next are a list of the front companies she used in Montana, some which were struck off, some which were voluntarily ended. But you could see a pattern here, can't you? Pattern, pun intended. Let's read some of that information. Reynolds is going to appear a lot in this excerpt because he was the money man, as Patton West made clear when she was deposed by my lawyer, I think in 2009, October. Reynolds claims Cole owes West $753,000, blah, blah, blah. Well, kind of, that's debatable. I mean, Cole was obviously brainwashed and conditioned by Patton West. And when Patton West charity was struck off in Victor, Montana in January 2004, she had to vacate the property and move somewhere else. So she moved north 100 miles to Victor, Montana, told all of the sheeple in her cult that only those who were prepared to donate 66% of their net worth would be allowed to accompany her to Shambhala. And of course, Cole volunteered to do that. Of course, in the real world, Cole could have changed her mind, but unfortunately, inside the cult, she couldn't because she was being coerced, intimidated daily, beaten physically daily, and I'm sure she was on the receiving end of a campaign of terrorist attacks just to get her mind focused about handing over her entire net worth to Patton West. And that's exactly what happened. Cole cashed in an IRA as well, signed over her home so that Patton West and her son and others could occupy it, which they did until they were evicted by a bank, the Wells Fargo Bank. Now, let me see. Out of 6 businesses mentioned in West's literature, only one remains active and in good standing with the Montana Secretary of State office, Sacred Environment LLC. 2 were never registered, Divine Unity Foundation and Millennium Mind Institutions. 2 were involuntary dissolved, Soraya Enterprises Unlimited and Global Guardianship Initiative, and 1 was involuntarily revoked, Sacred Archives Institute, which was part of the corporation which was struck off in January 2004. But Patton West didn't blink. She's a career criminal. The Sacred Archives Institute became the Sacred Arts Institute. She just carried on doing what she was doing regardless. Besides being evicted from her Bayside home in Lakeside and bouncing a check for the purchase of a well-known Osprey house on Angel Point, remember that earlier in this part of the movie? She was basically using Robert and Tabby Ivy's property, portraying it in her brochures and on her websites as being her compound in an attempt to portray herself as a wealthy business person. Now, remember, this Big Fork Eagle was published on August 9th. On July 12th, Patton West was in court for the child custody case where she was giving evidence on behalf of a porn-loving, wife-beating son, wherein she told the court that her businesses were multi-billion-dollar affairs. And yet the reality is that she was close to bankruptcy again and owed $2,287 on unemployment taxes for her Montana employees. Of course, Reynolds will do what he's told to say, however illegal, immoral, or how dishonest it is. Reynolds is saying that the victims were stirring up trouble by publishing the truth about West. He points out that the former office manager, Rebecca West, who is no relation to Devra West, was denied benefits by the Montana Department of Labor and Industry because she was unable to prove a hostile environment existed at Soraya Enterprises Unlimited. Well, there was definitely a hostile environment there, and all the information I have proves it over and over and over again by multiple witnesses. And yet, Patton West is able to field members of a cult, as fake witnesses, false witnesses. So whether it's a child custody case, Rebecca West going to the employment tribunal, Patton West feels her liars, and that's how victims never get compensation. I guess one of the worst was Joseph Costantino. He was owed $20K in back pay and salary. Patton West refused to pay it, just as she did with me. I recorded it. Yes, I owe you this money, but I don't see myself writing out a check for what I owe you. Ditto, Joseph Costantino. He was owed 20 grand. He took her to tribunal. He was awarded 10,000 after her liars did their stuff, and then he died suddenly afterwards. And ditto, Lisa Swidler saw what was going on with other victims like Dave Kushner, defrauded out of 30K, Hendrickson defrauded out of 200K, and Marion Cantwell kidnapped, beaten, held captive, and forced to donate tens of thousands of dollars to Patton West's good causes. Again, all of this is well documented, but the authorities out in Montana did nothing with the information. They're not set up to do anything with the information. And it's not a coincidence that Patton West only operates in New Mexico, Montana, and Arizona, because they are backwards in terms of their legal setups and their ability to prosecute crimes. Maybe they don't know what white-collar crime is there. They certainly don't go after idiots like Patton West so far. This is all going to change that. Top of next slide, headed abusive. Devra West's history includes numerous allegations and legal troubles. Yes, these are extensively covered in this movie, Rishi the Movie, which is now up to parts 21. Going down, testimonies, yes, all of that has been recorded elsewhere, but this is from a different source, so it's worth actually reporting. Next slide, headed Nicholas Roberts worked as Devra's personal assistant. Describing his wife's initiation ritual, it sounded like my wife was being crucified. She screamed for 5 minutes and her spine contorted. Her eyes rolled back in her head, fluttering. She was convulsing uncontrollably. Her fists were clenched tightly. How many other victims have been the subject of these kinds of attacks? I have been under attack for 19 years, and over the last 18 months, 2 years, it has been raised, those attacks have been raised to a new high level. Most of the attacks are designed to make me ill, focused on my prostrate 24/7. Hey, coincidence, Joseph Costantino died of prostate cancer after taking her to the employment tribunal. Anyway, again, all of this information is already there. I mention it because it's from a different source. Down to Amelia Rose, local resident, witnessed Devra totally degrading, demeaning, and yelling at a follower. When Rose tried to help, the follower told her, "You have the wrong idea. She's helping me. She's the Rishi." Again, they're brainwashed droids. You know, they don't have any discernment. They don't have the ability to think about what is going on. They just download what Patton West says and take it as gospel. Nancy Devra would scream a lot at me, at her ex-husband Jack, at her kids, at anybody who was close to her. Yet we've got this documented elsewhere. Patton West is not a guru, as I've said 1,000 times. She's a career criminal, a dangerous psychopath, a serial killing murderer, and a terrorist and has got away with it for 35 years, racketeering for 35 years. Next slide, AJ White at the top. All of the personal assistants that I have encountered in my time with Divine Unity were verbally, emotionally, spiritually, and sometimes physically abused. Hello, FBI. Look at the part of the movie where she's advertising non-existent jobs. Look at the part of the movie where when these new employees arrive, they get a 20% pay cut on day one, and any health benefits they were promised suddenly disappear. And then the work begins once they're in the cult. Those that don't go back to where they came from, having been disappointed by their new employment opportunity, they then become farmed animals like chickens and cattle as their wealth is stripped away from them, their self-esteem, and just about everything else. But getting her victims to her compound is only half the business plan. Those that refuse to submit to her will are disposed of like used Kleenex. Why don't we listen to her say that again? Because I've watched you treat other people, sometimes in a very, very bad way. You dispose of them like Kleenex.
That's right.
You treat them
Absolutely.
terribly.
I've disposed of a lot of people of late. It's true.
If you have not learned anything about me, learn this. You will not do that with me. But the sad thing is, Patton West actually means it. On the screen now is a letter from her office manager, Rebecca West, no relation, to me, and here it goes. After more than 30 employees coming and going, 16 just since I started on May 1st, 2006. This was sent in March 2007. 2 of 3 very much under her control due to fear. So 2 or 3 have taken. They've been brainwashed and conditioned, so they're useful idiots going forward. And the others decided they didn't want anything to do with her. So here you have the business model. Advertise non-existent jobs, have them come from all over the country, many of them burning their bridges at home with their current employment, previous employment. They come on the first day, they're defrauded out of 20% of the pay that they were promised and the health benefits. Then they're subject to brainwashing and conditioning, which most of them obviously are not going to put up with, which is why 16 left over about 12, 15 months or whatever, but 3 or 4 stayed. The 3 or 4 are useful, the others she's got rid of, just like disposing of used Kleenex. This is racketeering, and she's been doing it for 35 years. Then we have the terrorism, then we have the murders on top. But we haven't finished with her fake jobs business model yet, because when the people that do remain, either as employees or students, when they've had enough abuse, they leave. Many of them in hard circumstances, let me just say that, and they go to employment tribunals, and Patton West subverts the employment tribunals by fielding loads of her newbie current members who are prepared to lie and give false witness on her behalf. And this has been going on for decades. Rebecca, that's Rebecca West, no relationship to Devra West. Devra slugged her 3 times in the back, witnessed a woman get hit with a 3-ring binder. Testimonies from other witnesses, John Mark Young. That is a good testimony to read from John Mark Young. Again, Patton West has a compound. It is apparently not subject to state laws, employment laws, federal laws, the IRS or anything else. She just does what she wants. That includes violently abusing her employees and students, along with, of course, theft, fraud, extortion, embezzlement, murder, violent assaults, overt and covert. It's about time the FBI looked into this, don't you think? Next slide. John Mark Young worked for Devra. He reported Devra's abuse to the police. Of course, they did bugger all. Said he experienced her volatile personality and demanding perfectionism, dictatorial style, constant micromanagement and mind control tactics of interrogation and coercion, as well as using influence and hypnosis. Yes, that's how they become brainwashed droids. They're hypnotized. Ritual magic at the meetings where the music is controlled just to the right level, the right kind of music. And then she uses her occult abilities to give the impression to the brain, the sheeple, basically, that she's some kind of god that can give them an energy fix. And, well, anyway, let's move on. Devra seems to be using fraud and extortion to attract money from potential supporters. Yeah, she's been doing it for 35 years. Further down, Devra Patton West is operating a dangerous criminal cult. Yes, she's been doing it for 35 years. Down the bottom, Tanya Hurley said she was very damaged by her involvement with Devra, in which Devra would rage, rant, scream, yell, sometimes growl and point out all our shortcomings. This has nothing to do with perfection. This has everything to do with dismantling the target's personality, dismantling their objectivity. Perfection is never sought. It is the, if you like, the illusion under which Patton West breaks down the victim's personality so that she can basically take them over and dominate them and control them. A la Cole, a la Williams, and countless other victims. Next slide, Deborah Coffey. I witnessed 3 occasions in which Miss West violently pulled the hair of 3 female staff members. In each case, the hair was pulled and the head was shaken forcibly from side to side. On some occasions, Devra would hit people in the face. I witnessed one occasion in which she hit a man in the forehead, leaving an abrasion where her ring cut the skin. Devra shook a woman's head so violently that it tore her ear, and she then the victim had to undergo reconstructive surgery. Yet that was Beatrice Maguire. It was done in front of scores of witnesses. Of course, when Beatrice got a lawyer to send a letter to Patton West and to me, because I was still shown as a director after I had left. I was shown as a director in 2324 still. Once I realized that, I asked the cult to remove my name from the list of directors. But nonetheless, I got the letter. Long story short, Patton West received Beatrice's lawyer's letter, and her response is that she didn't recollect the events happening the way Beatrice described them, or the other witnesses, and that she agrees to pay Beatrice's medical expenses to get plastic surgery for her ear, but does not accept any liability for it, does not acknowledge that it happens, but is giving her the money out of the kindness of her heart. It's all this lies, bullshit, propaganda. Moving on, Devra would justify her violence through denial, insisting that insisting that a deity committed the abuses instead of her. Well, it's quite possible she is being run by demonic entities. That would explain her behavior. Said that she was involved in public humiliation or degradation rituals. Yes, that is what was described earlier, where she breaks down people's personality until there's nothing left. After weeks, maybe months or years of abuse, and then she inserts her own personality into the empty vessel, which she can then control. A la Lolita Jordan, who was the latest example of a house slave she's taken over. Patrick, local resident, said his girlfriend suffered 40 to 50 hours of shaming, battering, guilting, shouting and screaming from Devra. Again, none of this has anything to do with enlightenment. It has everything to do with racketeering. What she's doing is preparing her victims before she extracts their wealth and their life force. Caitlin Smith, she was yelling and cursing at a follower, just totally demeaning him. It was the loudest yelling ever. He looked beaten down. I knew something was off. Devra mocked an assistant was a vegetarian by asking the vegetarian to make some chicken. Anonymous witness a member lose consciousness during an intense session with Devra. Witness blood spots on Devra's shoes and a bloody laundry tub full of Devra's clothes. Yes, again, this is not about enlightenment. It is about violently beating her victims into submission prior to emptying their bank accounts into hers. Next slide, top of. John Watson, Devra's former business consultant, accused Devra of lying to her followers to manipulate them into giving her money. You think? And for my troubles, I've had 2 failed attempts to murder me, 19 years of terrorist attacks, defamed, almost bankrupted, as have many others. Down the bottom, it says Devra moved to Whitefish, Montana. I'm sure that's a misprint on behalf of the newspaper because Devra Patton West, the self-appointed planetary regent, said she was moving to Shambhala, not Whitefish, Montana. Devra's followers reportedly had to donate at least 66% of their income to be able to move to Montana with her. Yeah, it's all about enlightenment, isn't it? Next slide, top of, financial lawsuit. Followers allege they've been conned out of hundreds of thousands of dollars. They have. Alleged extortion of $1.3 million from Cole by threatening her with murder. Yeah, there were witnesses to that. Michael and Laurie Hendrickson basically were defrauded out of $200,000. West was the subject of an arrest warrant for felony check fraud related to the purchase of a $6 million home. Yes, that happened in 2007. And that was the $6 million home that she was advertising for 2 years in her brochures and on her website as already being her compound. John Watson, that's me, former business partner, was awarded $700K after he sued for fraud. Yes, I did win that lawsuit. So when I went to the appeal hearing, remember, she doesn't fight civil lawsuits because 95% of them she can terrorize into dropping and leaving her alone. Anyway, I didn't. So at appeal, her and her stooge Reynolds served me for defamation. Now, the truth is it's an absolute defense for defamation, but only if you can afford to fly into the USA and pay lawyers' fees to defend the truth. I couldn't. They got summary judgment, and I think they each got awarded $5 million. And I heard Reynolds, being a good old boy, signed over his award to Jack West. That's what I heard. I don't know whether it's true or not. Moving on, a lien was placed against Devra for failing to pay unemployment taxes. True. That lien was it was in situ in July 12, 2007, when Patton West was in court for her son, saying that her business interests were worth billions of dollars. Yep, Kushner was defrauded out of $30,000. Devra reportedly fraudulently applied for $150K PPP loan. Yep, other witnesses have confirmed that. And you can read the list. It just goes on and on and on. I mean, there are probably hundreds of victims. Yep, Devra West faced a foreclosure action for $1.5 million. I assume that was to do with the sheriff's sale, which I think was held in 2008, at which Patton West was being basically forced to pay past victims of crime. I thought it was 2 million, that was the figure I was told, in court fines and interest. As mentioned earlier, in preparation for that, Patton West stole, then hid the charity's assets, which came in the form of the property, which she put in a personal trust for her and her son, stolen that from the charity. And then at 2002 valuations, there was $4 million worth of artwork and valuables, which went into a lockup and then reappeared when she moved to Arizona. Yeah, the arrest warrant for felony theft, that's a fact. Devra West was involved in an eviction case, yes, required to vacate the premises. Yes, the charity certificate was revoked after I wrote to the Secretary of State for Montana. Yes, stole the property worth $1.25 million in 2004, I believe. And yes, we've got the missing artwork and valuables at the bottom. Yeah, this is a well-tried and tested plan of racketeering over 35 years, with most of the extracted wealth either going offshore into jewels, into precious metals and artwork and valuables, stuff that can be hidden and is hard to trace. We are now at the end of part 21 of Rishi the Movie. And I don't know whether there are going to be any other parts, but on the assumption that this may be the last part, let me just recap my experiences with the self-appointed planetary regent, Devra Patton West. In brief, I was suckered in to be a business consultant for Patton West, using the same part of the business plan that she uses to get employees in. In other words, she advertises non-existent jobs which she can't afford to pay, basically as a means of recruiting. We've gone into that. So I, not the first consultant to be suckered in the same way with Patton West. I get in there, she can't convert me into a droid. I find out that her business model is basically criminal, and I suggest that it could be fixed. No, I get summarily dismissed. I sue her and go public. I'm the subject of threats. I am the subject of mass defamation. I am the subject of intimidation. I am the subject of 2 failed murder attempts. I am the subject of 19 years of terrorist attacks. I am the subject of a $10 million extortion scam by Reynolds and Patton West against myself. In brief, Jeffrey Reynolds goes to work for a cult in September 2006. And yet he turns up at the appeal court and serves me for defaming him between 2002 and 2006. And yet prior to arriving at Patton West compound in September 2006, he worked in California. So basically, as I've said, the truth is an absolute defense against defamation if you can afford to defend the truth. They gambled I couldn't afford to defend the truth, and they got their award. And that's the other part of this criminal conspiracy against me. It's what criminals do. If they can't intimidate you, they can't murder you, then they buy the law they want. And they bought the law that they want. It was funded by Julio Williams, who pledged $2 million to Patton West so that she could afford to defend herself against her victims. Williams being the same idiot droid which in 2005 said that he'd staked his honour, reputation and all of that on defending her personal integrity and establishing the truth. Of course, what Williams wouldn't understand, because he's not that bright, is that I and the scores or hundreds of victims of Patton West World Service are telling the truth. And Williams, a brainwashed and conditioned droid in Patton West cult, is putting up $2 million of his personal fortune to block the truth. That much will become clear to the investigators. So this video is already an hour long, so I'm going to end it here and put the rest into part 22. The image you're looking at now shows something that I see happening in the very near future. So all we have to do now is keep banging on the door of the FBI, the police, state governments, etc., and get them to focus on one of America's most prolific criminals and maybe one of America's most prolific serial killers. Let's move on to part 22.